Okay, hello. My name is Arthur Fink, and I will be talking to you today about solid waste management for Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism facilities and staff. Uh, Today, we will kind of go over a brief introduction about myself and as well as my coworker here, Abby Sroufe, who will also be talking here in a bit regarding food waste and PFAS waste. But before we get into that, I will be talking a little bit about the USDA grant project overview. This will be going over the project that currently K-State is working with Wilson Lake State Park with. Then we'll also talk about some solid waste issues. We'll have a brief mention of hazardous waste. And then Abby will continue on with the food waste discussion, composting discussion, and the PFAS containing waste. And then we'll have a short conclusion. So first thing up is the project and kind of why I am here and why I am talking to you today. And it has to do with the USDA Solid Waste Management Program. And this is a program that's actually got a couple of grant pieces to it. There's a piece that deals with solid waste, and then there's also a piece that deals with water treatment and wastewater treatment. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about the solid waste portion of it. And the funds for the grant can be used for any of the following. And as you can see, item number 3 is the particular grant piece that we will be focusing in on, and that's to provide technical assistance or training to help communities reduce the amount of solid waste going into their landfill. And sorry, let me get my buttons right here. The other pieces of this grant include it must serve a rural area, which is a population of 5,000 people or less. Also service areas that have less than the state non-metro median household income, and also addresses services the rural opportunity zones that are located throughout Kansas. In addition to that, there are also points for this grant that were given additionally for projects that address food waste and its diversion away from landfills, addressed composting and its use to manage organic waste, and address PFAS waste in response to protecting natural water resources. So why Kansas State University? Why the USDA? Well, as I mentioned, the USDA has the capital. They're the ones who provided the money for this project, but they are also in charge of the rural development and rural utility service programs. The USDA RD, if you can think of things like the rural electrification, REC cooperatives, those were a project put on by the USDA, our rural development. Currently, another big project is to bring Wi-Fi to locations all throughout rural Kansas, and that is also being managed by the USDA. So they've got a lot of experience when it comes to looking at the utility structure of rural areas, including rural Kansas. Why KSU Pollution Prevention Institute? KSU PPI has decades of experience working with solid waste issues and food waste issues. We also have a lot of experience working with companies and organizations across Kansas dealing specifically with environmental issues. The other project components that are a part of this solid waste project that we're dealing with Wilson Lake State Park. They are indeed our partner facility, but in addition to just working with the park, we wanted to look at all of the components that I mentioned previously of food waste, of solid waste, and of PFAS containing wastes. And also make this information not available just to Wilson Lake State Park, but to everybody. And that's part of the reason why we're talking with you today, is to bring this information to other state parks and possibly to county parks or to federal parks that are located within Kansas. Oftentimes, these projects doing outreach for specifically solid waste have soft metrics dealing with did your perception of this change, or do you feel more educated, or kind of the metrics that we've relied on in the past for these types of projects. We wanted to do something, though, a little bit more concrete. And doing that, we have brought solid waste auditing to this project. And I know Abby will talk about that in a little bit more detail here in a bit. But we wanted to have those hard metrics so we could have some real pointers at the end of this project to say whether or not we were success, a failure, or at least maybe pointed in the right direction. So the key events are outlined for our project are listed here. We're going to use the term solid waste audit quite a bit, but there will be 3 of those involved with this project. A pre-camping season one that was already taken place prior to the Memorial Day holiday. We've had another audit since the Memorial Day holiday, and then we'll have a 3rd one, which will take place at the end of July, towards the end of the kind of camping season, if you will. In addition to that, we will also have a couple of education events, including the one that we're having right now, which is geared towards facilities, administrators, and workers at state parks, specifically those in rural areas. And then also, too, we're going to have 2 patron education events as well. We've already had one of those events, and again, Abby will talk about that here in a little bit, but we have an upcoming one, which will be taking place actually this coming weekend, where we will reach out to park patrons and try to educate them on some of these issues as well. Other project considerations for this particular project that we're doing out at Wilson Lake State Park, pardon me, is the type of divisions and data that we want to look at. In the food waste category, there are multiple divisions. There's food that's pre-cooked. There's foods that generate a wasteful portion of their product just in their natural consumption. Think of it like a watermelon rind or orange peels. There's also other sets of data that we can look at as we go through and do solid waste audits of things like aluminum for recycling, for example. We can also do divisions of the dumpster locations. As one example of that is looking at the dumpsters near the tent camping areas as opposed to the RV camping areas. So there's a lot of ways that we can look at the data once we go out and collect it. The other issues that we've got run into are safety issues. We're doing this project in the middle of summer, so obviously summertime heat is going to be an issue. The collection events, the campgrounds clear out on Sunday. The actual solid waste pickup by the refuse company that picks up for Wilson Lake State Park happens on Monday. So that pretty much left us with Sunday afternoon and evening for doing this work, which is not normally the time when most people do work, especially outside work, but we had to adjust it for this project. The other thing that we have to be careful for are these are public dumpsters, and so things like weapons, carcasses, explosives, drug paraphernalia, you name it, could possibly be in this waste stream. So we've had to take extra precautions to make sure that we can identify and mitigate any of those issues should we happen to find them. And then lastly are the actual patrons themselves. Everybody likes to go out to the lake to have a good time. If they drink beer, they'll likely drink a case of beer if they're out there at the lake. People really look forward to their time of cutting back, but that also brings with it intoxication, people that perhaps are up to no good that we might run across. So again, we've made plans and mitigation efforts to deal with those issues should we run across them. Here are some pictures of what we are doing out at Wilson Lake State Park. Here's an example, just a nice picture of the pretty blue water that they have out there. It is a very beautiful facility. Here is an example of the dumpsters that we have been looking at and have been going over and Here's another example of some pictures that were taken of some turkey carcasses that were found in a dumpster before we even got really started into the project. So just kind of an idea of what we're looking at and some of the things that we've had to deal with thus far and will continue to deal with throughout the remainder of the project. The outcomes for this project, basically, we've got a few of them listed here. We want to establish rates of solid waste and PFAS generation or food waste generation. We also like to establish some type of a baseline for PFAS containing wastes. Educate not only the park staff like we were doing through this video, but also the park patrons, as we have done in our previous park education, patron education event, and the next one that we have planned for this upcoming weekend. Additionally, we want to educate everybody about the potential for composting and hopefully get the patrons to realize that this food waste, rather than leaving it for the park to deal with, that it can be put back in their cooler or put into a bucket and taken home, either given to their pets if it's still edible, if not, taken home and composted in their home composting operations, if you will. And then lastly, the big thing that we hope to see is some type of a decrease in food waste generation over these 3 audits. We know that between the first and second one that there was an increase just because of going from the non-camping holidays into the camping season. So we were expecting to see an increase from the first into the second audit. Hopefully the third audit is where we will see a dip back down. And that will be attributed to education and not to just some other issue like was a rainy weekend, or if the weather didn't cooperate, we'll adjust for that as well. But when taking all those adjustments in, hopefully we will see some type of a decrease. Going in specifically to take a look at hazardous or at solid waste generation, there's what we call the hierarchy of solid waste, kind of a reverse pyramid as you look at it here. And these are all of the options once something becomes a waste of how we can deal with it. And down here at the bottom is the least preferred method. As you can see, this little arrow that goes on the left side of the triangle is to landfill stuff. And that's currently where, at least out at Wilson State Park, the food waste, the recyclables, everything is currently going to a landfill. As we move up the hierarchy of waste, the preferred methods that we would like to see up at the very top would be source reduction. And that's this education event that we're putting on for the patrons themselves, is to get them to hopefully bring less food into the park environment that will ultimately wind up as waste. We want people to still have a good time. We want them to enjoy their get-togethers. We just want to see it done with less waste. The other thing that we would like to see is below the source reduction, of course, is reuse and recycling. And with both of those are opportunities that we've seen thus far out at Wilson Lake State Park, specifically for reuse. If food has been cooked, and rather than simply after it's done and everybody's eaten, just to have the leftovers go right into the trash, to try and get people to maybe save those brats or save that salad in the cooler, making sure, to keep food safety in mind, but to reuse that food. That's always the best option, other than obviously not wasting it to begin with. And then the recycling piece that I'd like to talk about too is, as we were at Wilson State Park, one thing we noticed is that there was a lot of beverage containers that weren't being recycled. And that there certainly does look like there's a lot of opportunity to not only recycle it, but possibly capture some cash in return for those commodities as you collect them. So we'll be mentioning that to Wilson State Park staff, but that's something that we recommend that all staff and all facilities take a look at your waste streams and see exactly what's inside of it. Is it predominantly food waste? Is that food waste predominantly in your tent camping areas? There's lots of ways, like I said, to analyze this. We plan on doing that quite a bit as we collect the data and do some more analysis in the office after it's been collected. But we certainly welcome all facilities to take a look in and informally audit your waste streams and see exactly what is it that's going into your dumpsters and then heading out with the refuse companies to the landfills or transfer stations. So, why do we want to control the solid waste at a facility, or also to hazardous waste? And I will mention that briefly here in a bit, but for the purposes of this talk, we're going to talk mainly about solid waste. And the biggest reason, as any manager of a facility or business can tell you, it's cost, cost, cost. Solid waste does not occur free. It doesn't, the government doesn't just provide for its pickup and transport to the local landfill or transfer station. No, that is a paid service that every facility must deal with. And obviously, the more solid waste you have, the more it costs to get rid of. The other issue that we're running into right now is fuel. As the cost of fuel goes up, so does the cost of disposal. And if you have a big influx of solid waste to your facility, you're also going to have staff on your facility side to manage it, to make sure that it's getting pushed back into the dumpster, that it's not winding up blowing across the parking lots and such. The other reason that you may want to control solid waste at your facility are for moral reasons. As we're seeing, many companies who sell products have witnessed the control that social media has over our decisions we make when we purchase things, when we go places, when we recreate. And that includes when people go to the parks. If they know that a park is doing the right thing, quote, doing the right thing morally, they may be more apt to use that park in the future, as opposed to a place that maybe is having issues managing either their solid waste or their liquid waste. The other thing it does is improves employee and patron health and safety. If your solid waste is managed correctly, you don't have the smells, you don't have the raccoons, the possums trying to get into the dumpsters, you don't have the insects, the bees and wasps buzzing around the dumpsters. All of those things improve not only the health and safety for your employees, but also for the park patrons as well. And then, of course, ultimately, it comes down to the simple mantra of waste not, want not, which is part of the pollution prevention mantra as well, is if you don't create the issue to begin with, you don't have to deal with the issue on the backside. And if people can not create the pollution, not create that waste to begin with, then they won't have to deal with that issue on the backside of throwing it away, and the facilities ultimately won't have to pay for that extra cost of throwing things away and managing that refuse. Here's a great map that shows the regional flow of solid waste throughout the state of Kansas. And there's a few things that I'd like to point out on this map. First of all, on the eastern side of the state, you can see just how far solid waste travels. In some instances, it can be close to 100 miles or more that the waste is going from the transfer station and then being shipped to the landfill. And here in Western Kansas, it seems like we have much better coverage, but there's something I'd like to explain to everybody on these. A good majority of these smaller landfills that you see in these Western Kansas counties are what we call semi-arid landfills, or SALs. And that means that they do not have the liner or supposedly the risk to the water table below, the aquifers below the landfill. Of course, as we've seen with the weather here over the past many years, that precipitation patterns change, and what as you'll notice, these lines of these smaller landfills all occur at the 25-inch rainfall line or less. However, we know that that line is slowly shifting to the east, so that could potentially bring the waivered status for some of these semi-arid landfills into doubt in the future. Again, no matter which side of the state you're on, it does everybody ultimately good if we try to conserve the landfill space that we do have and try to make sure that the landfills that we do have are being run to their best environmental protection ability. Again, how do we control solid waste at a facility? The first step is to establish a baseline. Again, that usually involves auditing the waste stream, digging into it, separating things out, weighing it. We've kind of come up with, I think, a little bit better of an option. And again, I'm going to let Abby talk about that here in just a moment. But it's no matter how you go about it, it's a stinky process, and it's definitely takes a lot of work. You know, you're lifting bags, you're separating trash, you're dressed in rubber gloves and usually Tyvek overalls to keep the ick off of you. It's certainly not something that you can delve into easily or quickly, but if done correctly, you can certainly get a lot of information, good information from it. Once you've established that baseline, then you can look at, well, what do we see that's going into that trash stream that we can see fluctuations in? What do we see, you know, peaks and valleys in? You know, is there a time of year maybe we're seeing more food waste? Is there a particular waste stream like cardboard that you're seeing a lot of that maybe you didn't realize that, hey, we could recycle this, or we could use it for mulch, you know, we could grind it up. There's always a way of dealing with these things and improving their management. And that's what I would, I guess, like to point out the most, is that if you do audit your waste stream, really take a look at the data you're getting and figuring out, how does that match up with our patronage? How does that match up with our use of our facility? You know, if you have a big fishing tournament, you know, are you going to expect to see a lot more fish guts and bags of fish heads in the dumpsters? You know, are you seeing a lot more, for example, hiking gear or you know, trashed out tent gear and stuff on weekends where it's been storming? All of those things usually have a cause and effect, but figuring all of that out is really kind of what the audit process is about. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about real briefly is hazardous waste. And then after this, I will turn it over to my coworker, Abby, to talk more about the food waste side of things. But hazardous waste, most park facilities are going to generate this through their paints or solvents or some type of O&M operation. It could be your vehicle maintenance shop. You've got you know, some type of a degreaser that you're using. It could also happen illegally, as we have seen that there's not a lot of controls on many of the dumpsters in these parks. And if people want to, they can throw away all kinds of things. And it could be wind up that they could throw away, you know, a half a truckload of old pesticides, let's say. If that shows up at your facility, do you know what you're going to do about it? Currently, the advice that we give to most facilities, if they have any type of hazardous waste, is to first of all contact your local county household hazardous waste facility and see if they are allowed to take in materials from small businesses or from governmental organizations. If that's not an option, there are a number of private hazardous waste contractors across the state that can take this material and dispose of it properly. And if you're having an issue contacting either your HHW or those private waste contractors, feel free to give the Kansas Small Business Environmental Assistance Program a call. And our phone number is 1-800-578-8898. And calls are confidential and can remain anonymous. And there's never a charge for the help that is given through the phone line. And if need be, you can call back several times to order to get the situation figured out. But that is a good resource, and I highly recommend it to all facilities that are dealing with any type of a hazardous waste issue. And here is a quick map too of where all of the household hazardous waste and some of the yard waste composting facilities are located across the state. As you can see, most of the state is pretty well covered. There are some gaps on the western edge and in the Flint Hills region of some of the HHW facilities. But again, give us a call and we can certainly get you pointed in the right direction. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to food waste and have my coworker Abby tell you guys a little bit more about that.
Hi, I'm Abby Sroufe, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about food waste and why it is that we are focusing particularly on food waste for this project. Of course, when people come to state parks, a lot of the time they're camping, and just by design, there's going to be a lot of food waste involved in the camping process. People pack it in, maybe they overpack and they throw it away. They don't want to haul it back with them to Wichita or Kansas City or wherever it is that they're coming from when they come to a rural park like Wilson. Food waste is problematic because it's almost 70% water. So that makes it really heavy, and being heavy to transport makes it take up more fuel. It also increases those tonnage fees that parks have to pay when it's being hauled off. The increase in fuel also contributes to carbon dioxide emissions, and food waste contributes more to those greenhouse gas emissions because it goes to a landfill and rots and generates methane. Food waste, from the point that the food is produced and transported to the people who purchase it from a store, take it home, and then eventually end up just throwing it away until the point that it gets to a landfill, it's estimated to contribute to almost 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Part of why the parks would want to reduce food waste would be because they can help save money on those tonnage fees, as well as those kind of more soft metric reasons that Arthur mentioned earlier. Part of the reason why food waste and solid waste in general is so problematic for rural state parks is something that Arthur kind of touched on already, that regional flow of solid waste to where it needs to go to a landfill. When you're in a rural location like at Wilson, the nearest landfill is sometimes quite a ways away. So solid waste at Wilson has to travel 60 miles and an hour away to the Salina landfill. And that's a really big hit to those fuel costs, to the labor, to the emissions that are required to get that waste to where it needs to go. When we're talking about food waste, once it does have to be disposed of, the EPA has this food recovery hierarchy, which is similar to the hierarchy that Arthur's already kind of touched on about waste in general, but the most preferable would be source reduction. That's, of course, what we would recommend primarily, would be to not purchase as much, not prepare as much food in the first place. But once that surplus is naturally going to happen, and once it does, the next thing that we're suggesting to park patrons would be right here at the composting. This is a tangible, more of an accessible way for people to dispose of that waste that they can do at home themselves. And I'll touch on that a little more later on what we set up for patrons to see when they're at Wilson Lake State Park. So this is some of the education information that we compiled for patrons to see when they stop by our education events at Wilson Lake State Park. Some of it is a repeat of what we're talking about now, but we put a lot of information together on like understanding expiration dates, because that's a big reason why a lot of food is wasted. People aren't necessarily always clear on the difference between a use by or a best by date. We put together some information on composting and setting up a home composting bin, as well as composting display. We set up built a 3-bin compost display at just outside of the Tatanka Lodge at Wilson Lake State Park. All of the information that we compiled, we have set up in displays for people to view at our education events, but we also housed it all on our website and assigned a QR code to it so that we could have that easy display for people to just scan and be able to view all of that on the back end. Along with the educational information that we put together for park patrons to view at our education events, the point we're really trying to drive home for them is these kinds of minimization and diversion recommendations, which would, number one, be to pack less food. So paying attention to serving sizes on the packaging, making sure that you're doing the math in advance because you don't want to overpack anyway. That's more work for you when you're going camping and everything else you need to bring with you. So ideally, you're only bringing what you'll really need. And then when that excess does happen, then to explore the option of having like a bucket that you can put all that food in and take home with you and compost. Having an at-home composting bin is easier than a lot of people might think to just build in their backyard and have that option. That was part of why we built the display out at Tatanka Lodge for patrons to stop by and see when they view the rest of the educational information. We kind of put together some information on the basics of composting, and we're there to answer questions that people might have about composting at home. Something else we noticed during a few of those waste audits that we've done so far already is that there's a lot of cans, aluminum cans and cardboard that comes through the waste stream there from campers and RV campers. And Wilson Lake State Park doesn't currently have a recycling program. They used to, and kind of through COVID, the resources that they had to get those certain recyclable types of waste to where they needed to go didn't work out. So we're interested to see if there's potential to start another recycling program there to take those solid wastes out of the waste stream, like cans and cardboard. So particularly aluminum is helpful to generate some kind of income for the park as well through a recycling program. Another type of solid waste that we're looking at particularly are these PFAS chemicals. So they're particularly an issue because they break down so slowly or even not at all. So, and they've been linked to a multitude of different human health concerns. They got their start in Teflon and like nonstick cookware and just really kind of exploded in a lot of different types of products and have been really pervasive. There's just a wide variety of different types of the chemicals. That's part of what makes them so difficult to study and detect. And it's not completely known exactly how is the best way to dispose of them. And for that reason, they've contaminated a lot of different environments, which is what this map here is. I have a link to this interactive map of different contamination sites. This is kind of to give you a visual of, some different areas that have had a lot of issues with PFAS contamination at different sites. These are the purple showed these different like military bases where it's been found, which that's primarily because it's found in a certain type of firefighting foam that used to be used on military bases. And then these ones in blue show drinking water sites that it's been found as a contaminant. So part of the reason why I wanted to show this is just because so far, at least, whether it's just because it hasn't been tested a lot for, or maybe it just hasn't become an issue really so far in Kansas. So there's a lot of potential there for us as a state to look into it and make sure that we're taking note of anywhere that it could be an issue and handling that correctly and making sure we're going to follow whatever kinds of guidelines that the EPA or whoever might establish for PFAS, and making sure that we are looking into it in solid waste and verifying that we know where it's at and gathering as much information as we can about it. A little more information just about PFAS. Part of the reason why we felt it was something that was worth looking into in state parks is that because of the nature of the chemical, it's found in a lot of different water resistant type products. So camping equipment in particular tents, lawn chairs, fishing line. It's found in a number of different cosmetics. It's found in like the packaging around a lot of different types of foods. We knew that a state park and primarily where people are camping, it could be potentially a hotspot for people throwing away those kinds of wastes. So we want to see what those look like in the waste stream. We want to make sure that we're aware of them and that we can just gather as much information as possible on those. Something else really interesting about this group of chemicals is that blood tests have shown that it's found in the blood of like every human and animal that exists on Earth today. So the chemicals were just created in the 60s, but the products that they're in have been so pervasive that there's like not a single polar bear in a corner of the world that doesn't have some contamination in their blood. So it's very pervasive. It's found in water and soil and lots of different locations. Those higher quantities is when it starts to really become an issue. So states like on that map that I showed, states like Michigan and Maine, where it's become huge contamination risk, have even had to issue do not eat advisories for fish or deer that are harvested in parts of the state because, you know, they're inedible. They have such high quantities of the chemical in their blood. The waste audits that we've been doing to look at these different types of waste possibly containing PFAS or the amounts of food waste or recyclable wastes, instead of going through and sorting out each different can and bottle and everything out of a trash bag and weighing it and labeling it and all of that, we've come up with this system where we're taking bagged waste out of these dumpsters and then running it down. I think you can see my mouse here, running it down this chute that we have structured here. And up here, we have a Google Pixel that's filming in slow-mo. And then back here on the tripod, we've got a GoPro filming from kind of a different angle. So we're opening those bags of waste at the top and then letting it all flow down that chute. And then when we film it in slow-mo, we save all of that footage and then we can go back and identify what it was exactly in the solid waste stream. So we're looking at the potential of using AI object recognition to scan through those all that video footage, because it is in slow-mo, and that we can look back at and say, what exactly was here? We can set up different parameters and have it identify, is this recyclable waste? Is this food waste? What kind of food waste is this? Because some of it might be something like orange peels that no one's going to eat really, but it's still that food waste that's heavy and creates emissions and is problematic. Or it could be something like hot dogs that somebody cooked and they just don't want to pack out, but it's still edible. This gives us the potential to look back and kind of decipher what type of food waste is being thrown away, what's the biggest issue. We can look and see if we see fishing line or camping equipment, something that could contain PFAS. It's really giving us a lot of potential to look through the data afterwards and give us a better idea than maybe we even could if we were just combing through it all there on site. And here is kind of a little video example for you of what our data looks like. Okay, so here's kind of a slow-mo shot of what we see after the fact when we get it back. So when you're talking about heavy food waste, obviously something like a watermelon rind is pretty heavy. And there, kind of towards the end, you can see that plastic cup and an aluminum can. This is just a short little 9-second clip of some of what we see, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of food waste and a lot of cans and plastic. So that kind of just gives everyone an idea of what we're seeing when we go through these waste audits and scan the footage after the fact. So we're kind of partway through this project right now this summer. We've done one of our patron education events, and we have one more coming up this weekend. So here's some of the things that we're looking at to see how we can improve, or kind of things that we're still identifying. So our patron education event, we're looking at how we can increase the number of people that we get to stop by there. We're also kind of looking at maybe we just switch up the methodology that we're using for that. So it's obviously, you have a captive audience there because there are people who are obviously interested in going to the state park and being there and camping. But maybe that's just one aspect of how we can get in front of a lot of people. Maybe something like this, where it's a virtual presentation and just kind of some information that people can look at from their phone or the comfort of their own home. Or we've also looked at the potential of, there's the Camp It app that people use to book their campsites, that they're a lot of the time people who are park patrons are seeing that. Maybe they get a confirmation email. Maybe there's some other kind of touch point that virtually that we can use to get in front of some of those people. We're also looking at how exactly we want to analyze that data that we have from our waste audits. You know, what do we want the parameters to be exactly? How do we want that object recognition to, what do we want it to be looking for? You know, do we want it to look for recyclables in particular? Do we want it to look for different types of, like, do we want it to look for the secondary food waste that's like watermelon rinds, or would we rather it be focusing on, you know, food waste that is still edible? And something else we're looking at right now is how we can make sure we're getting this message out to lots of other rural state parks around Kansas. You know, we've partnered with Wilson, and they're a beautiful lake that's great to work with. And we've gotten a lot of really valuable information there. And we hope that some of the stuff that we're putting together can be sent out to some other rural state parks that might be able to use the information and find out exactly what they're doing with their solid waste stream, and if there's potential that they could be saving some money on fees that they're paying, or how we could just kind of streamline the process for them. This was just a quick run through of exactly what our project is, what we're doing out at Wilson Lake State Park, and what some of our goals are with this solid waste reduction project. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. If you have, you know, suggestions for us, we're glad to hear it. Thanks for tuning in.